Everyone off my property. That's what I said after I shut down the power to my son's birthday party hosted at my estate without my permission. My daughter-in-law invited over 100 guests, hired a band, and called it our house. They never sent me an invitation. At 11 o'clock, I walked to the generator and flipped the main switch. In the dark silence, they finally heard my voice. This is last goodbye. Today's story is about a mother whose son's birthday was celebrated on her estate without her, and the silent line she drew when her family tried to erase her. I have changed the characters' names to protect their privacy. If this happened to you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. The music rose from the south lawn in slow, thudding waves. From where I sat alone in the dark of the upstairs bedroom, I could feel the bass vibrating the floorboards, as if the walls of Mercer Lake Estate no longer belonged to me, but pulsed to a rhythm set by strangers. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a text from Jeanette, the neighbor who lived a half-mile down the road. It included a video of twinkling lights, white tents, lined in rows a glowing Happy Birthday Evan sign as tall as the porch railing. Underneath it, she'd written, "It looks incredible, Coraline. You really went all out this year." I didn't answer. Instead, I opened Instagram and there it was, Tamsin's live video. She was walking backward, filming the crowd behind her, laughter spilling out as champagne flutes clinked, and a hired band played something bright and forgettable. Her caption read, "Our house, our party, our family. Surprise 35th for my man at the lake house." The phrase stuck our house. I scrolled through the comments, dozens of them. So beautiful. This venue is unreal. Love seeing you two building your dream life. Not one person asked where I was. Not one person seemed to remember that I lived there. A loud cheer exploded from below, followed by a voice on the mic I recognized as Evan's old college friend, Darren. "Can we get Evan's mom up here? Where's she hiding?" There was a pause, then Tamsin's laugh light and practiced. "She's resting in the city," she said. Big week for her, poor thing. I had not been to the city in over 3 months. I stood up. The upstairs bedroom was quiet except for the muffled beat of the band and the occasional burst of laughter that reached all the way to the windows. I slipped on my walking shoes, the same ones I used when pruning the West Orchard, and reached for the heavy knit cardigan that still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. I walked out of the room and down the rear staircase, taking the long path that led toward the generator shed at the edge of the property. The gravel under my shoes gave a faint crunch as I crossed the service yard, guided by the low mechanical hum of the backup generator. It sat nestled beside the old pump house just past the laundry line, where I used to hang sheets on breezy summer mornings. My late husband, Owen, had installed the generator nearly 30 years ago, insisting the estate couldn't rely on the county grid alone. Back then, it was a precaution. Tonight, it was something else. The metal door groaned on its hinges as I opened it. Inside, the heat of the engine wrapped around me like a blanket, heavy and close. The room was small concrete floor, exposed joists overhead, the smell of diesel and dust soaked into the walls. The generator vibrated steadily in its corner, sending power into the party, the lights, the rented fans, the DJ's soundboard, the bar's freezer truck humming by the side hedges. All of it siphoned from my name, my land, my line of credit. I stood in front of the breaker box, the main switch marked in red. My hand hovered for a second. Then I wrapped my fingers around the lever and pulled it down. The generator choked once and died. Silence fell like a curtain. First there was confusion, laughter, a few startled screams, then dozens of voices calling out into the dark. Phones lit up the lawn in bursts. People moved like startled animals, their bodies scattered across the property in little glowing clusters. I stepped out of the shed, the breeze lifting my cardigan as I walked toward the center of the lawn. The moonlight caught the white gravel beneath my feet. No music, no amplifiers, just murmurs and a single phone camera pointed in my direction. "This is my land," I said loud enough to cut through the noise. "Every person on this property needs to leave. No one asked my permission for this party, and I did not give it." The murmur shifted to a hush. From somewhere near the bar, someone hissed, "Is that her?" Evan's voice pushed through the crowd, sharp and confused. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" Tamsin was right behind him, her voice too bright, too forced. "She's confused everyone. Just give us a second." I didn't step back. "You knew I was home. You planned this without asking. You've treated this house like your playground, and now you want to pretend I don't exist." "You're being dramatic," Evan snapped. "It's my birthday. This is my home too." I shook my head. "It's not your name on the deed." And even if it were, manners would still matter. Phones were still filming. Faces shifted between curiosity and discomfort. No one moved. Eventually, someone at the edge muttered, "I think we should go." And they did. Not all at once, but in slow trickles, laughter trailing off headlights sweeping across the gravel drive, engines starting up. By the time the last car pulled away, the only light left was from the moon. The lawn was quiet again, and I stood alone near the fallen tent poles, my cardigan clinging to my arms. Behind me, the dark house loomed silent, waiting for the pieces that would come next. By the time the sky began to pale, the party had already collapsed into silence. The white tents leaned drunkenly in the breeze, their stakes half pulled from the damp soil. Plastic cups lay crushed in the flower beds. A trail of gold confetti was stuck to the morning dew on the lawn, glittering like something spoiled. Inside the main house, I could hear two caterers clanging around in the kitchen, speaking low and sharp as they fumbled through the dark for their equipment. The generator was still off. I hadn't decided whether I wanted it back on yet. I walked the property alone, starting from the west patio, and tracing my way down to the old stone terrace that my grandfather had laid by hand. One of the glass balusters was chipped. A gouge maybe 6 feet long ran through the grass where one of the rental trucks must have spun its tires into the earth. The wheel tracks cut across the root bed of the elm I planted the spring after Owen died. I bent and picked up a stemless wine glass lying in the gravel path. The lip was cracked. I carried it to the garden bench and set it down gently next to 3 others. I didn't know why I was collecting them. I suppose I needed to do something with my hands. The wind carried the smell of stale beer and cake frosting. Snow, I remembered suddenly. The winter Evan turned 12, the delivery truck nearly got stuck halfway down the drive during a storm. I was out there at 5 in the morning shoveling the last third of it by hand so they could drop off the fuel drums. That same week, I picked up 2 extra shifts at the hospital laundry and closed a double at the diner because the second property tax installment was due. There had been so many weeks like that. Quietly hard weeks. No applause, just bills paid by the skin of my teeth. And through it all, Mercer Lake stood. Evan helped me repaint the boathouse one summer, back when he still called it our place. He was 13. He splattered more paint than he brushed, and I didn't care. "I'll never let this place go, Mom," he said that afternoon. "I promise." I think about that now as I run my hand over the splintered picnic table and notice a spot where candle wax has eaten into the varnish. To Tamsin and her guests, this was just a scenic backdrop, a curated vibe. To Evan, it has somehow become the lake house, a vacation property they intend to inherit, improve, and flip into something shinier. My phone buzzed. A new message. "Evan, we need to talk like adults about last night. You can't keep sabotaging my future because you're stuck in the past." I stared at the screen for a long time before I powered the phone off and slipped it into my pocket. The sky had gone from gray to pale blue. The light stretched across the lawn, hitting the front porch steps, where 2 sets of footprints led into the house. They weren't mine. Inside, I would find them sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. The chairs scraped against the old tile as I set them back into place at the kitchen table. The sunlight coming through the wide windows caught every nick in the surface, scratches from Evan's toy trucks, the water stain from where Owen once left his thermos too long, the faint blue paint smear I'd never been able to scrub out after a rushed Easter craft afternoon. Now the house was quiet. Not peaceful, just tense. Too big for comfort, too small to breathe. They arrived mid-afternoon. I heard the tires on the gravel, then the sound of heels clicking up the porch steps. I watched through the side window as Tamsin paused at the front door, took her phone out, angled it toward the lake view, and smiled into the camera. "We're back at the cutest lake property," she said in that bright, sing-song tone she used for all her content. "Couldn't wait to be home." Home. She didn't knock. Evan did. I let them in without a word. We sat at the table. Evan clasped his hands, leaned forward, like a man preparing for a staff meeting, and said, "Let's all just keep calm, okay?" Tamsin didn't sit right away. She walked slowly around the kitchen, eyeing things appliances, the hanging light, the chipped cabinet near the pantry. Her expression was already calculating. "I want to start by saying last night was beautiful," she said finally. "The turnout, the energy, amazing exposure. I really think we can build momentum around this place. If we frame the story right, our home could be a serious asset on the channel." My hands stayed folded in my lap. "Your home," I said. She blinked. "Well, I mean our house, this whole thing we're building. Me and Evan." He didn't correct her. Instead, he nodded and added, "We're just trying to think long-term, Mom. Build something real here together." I looked at both of them. "And what about last night? You didn't think the actual owner should be included?" Tamsin waved her hand lightly, her bracelets jingling. "It was a planning oversight. I was managing everything, vendors' guest list, posting schedule. You know how those things go." She sat down and crossed her legs, leaning in. "But honestly, if we made a few adjustments, this place could easily become a destination venue. We're talking weddings, retreats, influencer weekends. There's so much potential here. If you were willing to loosen up a little, it could really pay off." I kept my voice steady. "You mean like the patio, the lighting, the repainting for your wedding? All of which I paid for. It added value," she said quickly. "It modernized the look. And we brought in a whole new audience. People loved the transformation." I looked between them and saw with sharp clarity that this wasn't about one evening. The shift had already begun. The language had changed. The ownership, at least in their eyes, was already moving somewhere else. And if they were this comfortable saying it out loud, I had to wonder what they had already done in silence. The first time I heard someone call it their beautiful place, I was carrying a tray of wine glasses from the kitchen to the side terrace. It was Evan and Tamsin's engagement dinner. 40 people, maybe more, scattered across rented chairs under warm lights and white parasols. I'd arranged the flower centerpieces myself, peonies and thistle cut from the upper garden that morning, but no one asked. As I passed behind a group of guests near the stairs, a woman in a silk dress said, "You two are so lucky to have this property. It's absolutely stunning." Tamsin smiled like she'd owned it for years. "It's our dream," she said. I was still holding the tray. A week later, Tamsin returned with a tablet full of images and samples. "Just ideas," she said, flipping through mood boards and notes. "Things that would elevate the space." She pointed to the banister along the main staircase. "This needs to be sanded down and re-stained something matte, more modern." Owen spent 2 weeks on that banister after his first back surgery. His hand rubbed the top rail smooth every time he came up from the cellar. The entry tiles came next. "They're charming," she said, "but they make the whole space look dated." She showed me samples of slate and marble, quoted a figure north of $10,000 for the retiling. I wrote the checks. When she suggested removing most of the family photos from the hallway, they clutter the visuals, distract from the architecture, I hesitated. But Evans said, we can put them back after the shoot, and that was supposed to settle it. They never did. The emergency fund I'd set aside for a new well pump went toward patio leveling. The lighting upgrades came out of my retirement account money I'd been holding on to in case I couldn't manage winters on my own in a few years. It was all framed as investment. Evans said, we're just setting it up for the future for the family. Eventually, when the contractors needed full access to the interior, I moved into the apartment above the detached garage. Temporarily, they said. That was 14 months ago. My things are still in boxes. Tamsin filmed a Lake Estate kitchen reveal last May. I only found out when someone at the farmer's market mentioned seeing the stove in a reel. Then came the influencer brunch. I helped set out pastries and made the coffee. Tamsin wore white linen and a wide hat, giving the tour with her phone raised. When she got to me standing by the table pouring orange juice into mismatched glasses, she said, and this is Evan's mom. She helps us out here. Not the owner. Not my mother-in-law. Just someone who helps. I rinsed the carafes in the sink afterward and folded the cloth napkins in the laundry room, pretending I hadn't heard it. But that afternoon, something inside me shifted, because if I wasn't careful, I knew exactly what I'd become. A footnote on my own land. And by then, the birthday party wasn't far off. The first van arrived on a Wednesday morning. I was drinking coffee at the small kitchen table in the garage apartment when I heard the engine rumble down the drive. Through the window, I saw men in black shirts unloading metal poles, crates of string lights and folding tables. No one rang the doorbell or even looked toward the house. They moved quickly, measuring the lawn, driving stakes into the soil, marking areas with orange flags, as if this were a construction site instead of my home. An hour later, another truck followed this one, bearing the name of a local event rental company I knew well. I'd used them once, years ago, for Owen's retirement dinner, but this time, the invoice taped to a crate read, Client, the Lee Mercers. That evening, Evan called his voice light and casual. Tamsin and I are doing something small for my birthday this weekend, he said. You don't need to worry about any of the logistics this time. I wanted to ask why my lawn looks like a public fairground, but instead I said, small. He hesitated. Just a few friends from the city. Nothing crazy. Then he changed the subject to my blood pressure, as if my health had become his preferred way of steering me off a conversation. Later that night, through the open window above the garage, I heard Tamsin's voice carrying up from the terrace below. She was on speakerphone pacing. We'll have the dessert table by the dock, she said, and the signage has to match the gold in the logo. Yes, the Lee Mercers, exactly. Make sure the videographer gets the home tour before sunset. The next morning, I received an email from a local catering company confirming access to the estate for setup. I was only copied on the thread, no greeting, no response required. The contact line listed Evan Mercer and Tamsin Lee as hosts. By Friday, the delivery trucks had carved new tracks across the lawn. Rows of folding chairs lined the dock. I stood at the window and watched them mount a neon sign across the boathouse, the Lee Mercers. On Saturday afternoon, cars began to appear along the gravel drive. Cousins, neighbors, people I barely recognized stepped out in bright clothes carrying wrapped gifts. I watched from behind the attic curtain as they walked past the front door, waving first to Tamsin, greeting her with kisses and laughter. None of them looked up toward the window where I stood. The party was beginning, and the owner of the house was not on the list. By dawn, the yard looked like a battlefield the morning after surrender. One of the tents had collapsed in the night from the wind, its poles splayed like broken fingers. Cocktail napkins stuck to damp grass. Champagne bottles rolled against the edge of the dock. The neon sign had gone dark, its cursive letters still shouting, the Lee Mercers in silence. Most of the guests were gone by then, leaving behind trampled beds of alyssum and a sticky smear of frosting on the porch rail. I made coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table while the rest of the house remained empty. My phone buzzed once, then again. Evan, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. Tamsin vendors are threatening to pull out. You've endangered our contracts and made a mockery of our launch weekend. Then came something else, a message flagged urgent from a local bank. The subject line read, "Pending application. Verification required for collateral use of Mercer Lake Estate." I printed it and drove to town. Harvey Locke still kept his office above the old pharmacy. He looked older than I remembered. Grayer slower in his step, but he greeted me with both hands and didn't waste time with pleasantries. I handed him the letter. He read it twice. "They're applying for a commercial loan," he said, "finally tied to this property as security, in your name." "My name," I repeated. "Your legal name, social security number, and what appears to be your digital signature." I sat back. The room tilted slightly. Harvey rubbed his chin. "Do you remember authorizing anything, any kind of online access?" And then I did. Months ago, Tamsin had offered to help me switch the house utilities to paperless billing. She sat at the kitchen island with her laptop smiling, asking for a few old documents. Just to update some profiles, she said. Harvey asked for the full file from the bank. It came the next morning. The signature was there. My name neatly scrawled, time-stamped just after midnight on the weekend I'd gone to visit my cousin in Albany. Harvey's assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, asked if I had any home security. Evan had installed a basic system for package deliveries. It wasn't much, but it included screen recordings from the main study computer. Leo recovered clips from that weekend. One showed Tamsin in the office late at night, alone, logging into my email and toggling between tabs. One of them clearly bore the bank's logo. When I walked into the dining room 2 days later, I laid out every document on the table printouts, from the bank time-stamped screenshots, a still frame of Tamsin, seated in my chair in front of my computer. We used to eat Thanksgiving dinner at that table. Tamsin's eyes moved too fast. First she laughed. Then she said I had given verbal permission. Then she called it a misunderstanding. Finally she folded her arms and muttered, "Everyone does this kind of thing. If you don't act fast in this market, you miss your shot." Evan didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the printouts like he was hoping the ink would smudge and disappear. Harvey remained calm. If this loan had been approved and then defaulted, he said Coraline could have lost the estate. You understand that. No one answered. I stood at the head of the table and waited. Evan wouldn't meet my eyes. I gathered the papers one by one and slid them into a folder. The dining room light buzzed above us, casting shadows across the polished wood. Outside, a breeze lifted the edge of the party tent and turned it inward on itself. The papers rustled as Harvey slid them across his desk, one document at a time, his pen clicking gently between signatures. Together, we drafted the formal withdrawal of consent for the pending loan and notified the bank of unauthorized activity tied to my name and social security number. The application was frozen within 24 hours. Flagged. Marked for review. But Harvey was clear it wasn't enough to stop the fire. We had to fireproof the house. On his advice, I signed new documents the following week, an irrevocable trust, placing the Mercer Lake estate into protected status. No borrowing against it. No future sale without trustee consent. If the trust were ever contested, full ownership would pass to a conservation foundation that preserves legacy properties in the region. It was ironclad. Final. 2 days later, Evan showed up at the estate unannounced. He didn't park in the gravel lot. He pulled all the way up to the front steps like he owned the place. I was pruning back the blackberry bushes by the east fence line when I saw his car door slam shut. "Why didn't you tell me?" he shouted as soon as I came into view. He stormed into the kitchen behind me, furious. "You've stolen my future. You've locked everything down just to punish me." I stood at the stove, letting the kettle heat. "I protected the land. That's what I did." "You made sure I could never touch it," he said. "You left me nothing." "You were never owed it," I replied. "This land doesn't exist to solve your problems." We stood in the same kitchen where I once taught him how to cook scrambled eggs, where he used to read books aloud while I shelled peas. He paced. I stayed still. "This house," I said softly, "was here before you were born. And it will be here long after we're both gone. I won't gamble it, not for you, not for anyone." He left without slamming the door. That was something. Weeks passed. Then a cousin sent me a link to a video Evan and Tamsin's wedding. It wasn't here. A sleek venue near the city. Exposed beams, long tables, everything choreographed to music. Photos circulated. The cake. The dress. Their first dance under string lights. There was no sign of Mercer Lake. No trace of the dock, the trees, the stones I helped lay with Owen. No mention of me. That night, I made a bowl of soup and ate it alone at the kitchen table, the one I refinished myself during a quiet winter. The house was silent, but I knew it was still mine. And for the first time in months, that had to be enough. The summer settled into a quieter rhythm after the wedding that wasn't mine to attend. I hired Ramon again to help with the north fence line and paid a neighbor's grandson on weekends to mow the steeper slope by the orchard. Harvey's legal fees had left a bruise on my savings, so I picked up a few extra laundry shifts in town sheets from the in uniforms from the co-op, delicate fabrics that needed hand soaking. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid in quiet dignity. By August, the grapevines I'd nearly lost to foot traffic had come back, and the house, though scarred, had its shape again. Word made its way back to me in pieces. A failed rebrand of Tamsin's channel, a backup investor who backed out, an attempted consulting business that folded before launch. Whispers that a private lender pulled out once they saw the trust filings and the frozen collateral. No one said it directly, but I heard enough to understand that Mercer Lake's absence had unraveled the future they built on borrowed shine. Then one afternoon in late September, I looked up from pruning dead blooms along the lower path and saw a silver sedan turning slowly into the drive. Evan stepped out alone. He looked smaller, thinner in the face, his once fitted suit rumpled at the edges. His tie was crumpled and half pulled from his collar, like it had lost its purpose halfway through the day. He climbed the porch steps quietly, hands in his pockets. "Mom." I met him at the door, but I didn't open it all the way. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. His voice sounded rehearsed at first, like he'd been practicing in the car. For everything. For the party. For the loan. For trying to turn this into something it wasn't. The words cracked mid-sentence, and more honest ones followed. They'd tried to apply for another loan. Got denied. Tamsin blamed him. They fought. She left. He moved into a one-bedroom in a part of the city where the ceiling leaked and the neighbors fought through the walls. She never really wanted the house, he said. She just wanted what it could get her, and I let her use it that way. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, and for a while I just listened. He told me about the letters from debt collectors, the job he lost after missing too many meetings, the arguments, the silence that followed. "I know I don't deserve anything," he said at last. "I'm not asking to be part of the trust. I'm not asking you to change anything. If there's ever a fence to fix or a porch rail to paint, I'd like to help. I want to do something useful here again, if that's still possible." I didn't rush to answer. I looked down at my mug, then at his hands, calloused, now older. Not the boy's hands I remembered, but not useless either. "You won't be added to the trust," I said. "What's been signed stays signed." He nodded. "But the fence by the field needs patching." And the porch rail's been sagging since May. He didn't smile, not fully, but something eased in his shoulders. The wind moved through the screens gently, and for a moment the kitchen felt like it had breath again. The next morning, he showed up with gloves, a hammer, and a pack of wood screws. Winter passed gently that year. The snow came early, melted fast, and by late March the soil had already softened beneath the apple trees. Mercer Lake Estate didn't feel new again, it never would, but it felt steadier. Like a body that had survived a long illness and learned how to breathe differently. The trust papers were tucked inside a metal lockbox in the back of my closet, right behind the flannel quilts. The bank correspondence, the legal filings, the notarized statements, all of it filed in the bottom drawer of my grandfather's desk, resting beside the original deed from 1932. Evan came most weekends. Not always, but often enough to matter. He arrived in work boots, now not leather loafers. The suits had disappeared. He trimmed the hedges near the pump house, repaired 2 broken shutters, and patched the old cedar fence without being asked. He brought his own tools and left receipts on the kitchen counter if he had to replace anything. We kept a quiet rhythm. Lunches on the back steps. Paper plates. Nothing formal. Some Saturdays we barely spoke. Other days we shared small things, how he'd taken a job doing bookkeeping for a local feed distributor, how he was making monthly payments toward an old credit card debt that Tamsin had opened in both their names. Her name came up once or twice, but only in passing. When it did, it floated like a finished chapter, no bitterness, just distance. He no longer spoke about business plans, no mentions of renovations or guest packages or anything branded. He asked how the trees were holding up after the storm and offered to reseal the dock before summer. One evening in June, I hosted a small dinner. Nothing extravagant, just grilled vegetables, a few roasted chickens, and folding tables set beneath the old maple near the edge of the field. My neighbors came. An elderly couple from town who'd known Owen stopped by with homemade bread. There were no hashtags, no signage, just laughter and music playing low on the porch radio. Everyone knew whose name still lived on the deed. As dusk fell, Evan stood at the edge of the dock with his hands in his pockets, looking back at the house. The boathouse wall was bare now. The neon sign was long gone. Nothing hung in its place. I joined him. We didn't speak. The lake was still. The silence felt earned. The house, once a battlefield, had turned back into a place where things could grow.